Welcome to GFAC Live, an open access webinar hosted by the Global Foresight Advisory Council. GFAC Live features thought-provoking inspiration and global visionaries that are transforming their communities. The Global Foresight Advisory Council supports the Future School's mission of ethically democratizing the future around the world. In addition to offering mentorship and guidance, the Council also serves as the accrediting body for the Future School Professional Foresight Certification. GFAC Live is brought to you through the Future School's Year of Free. All year long, we are providing free online experiences with practical inspiration and insights that you can implement in your business, community, and life. The Future School's Year of Free also includes free access to the Natural Foresight Framework and free tuition to our global training programs. To learn more about how you can participate in the Year of Free, visit thefutureschool.com/Year of Free. Now, it's time to unlock your inner futurist with GFAC Live. Join us in discovering the future and creating it today.
Well, good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. I say morning because it's morning for me in Orlando, Florida. And my name is Frank Spencer. If we've never had the pleasure of meeting before, I am a principal and the creative director and a facilitator and many other hats at the Future School. And I know many of you are alumni of the Future School, but others of you are joining maybe for the first time. So welcome, welcome. I'm certainly simply serving as a host here today. I'm with the Global Foresight Advisory Council. Some of them you can see if you're looking at the faces on the screen. And I want to jump right to our honored guest and speaker this morning, Bayo Akomolafe. We're so happy to have him speak. We have been waiting patiently for this day. And we've had many great speakers this year. Another one that we're so happy to have, Bayo Akomolafe. Rooted with the Aruba people in a more than human world, the father to Alethea and Kaya, grateful life partner to EJ, son and brother, a widely celebrated international speaker, post-humanist thinker, poet, teacher, public intellectual, essayist, and author of 2 books, These Walls Beyond Our Fences, Letters to My Daughter on Humanity's Search for Home by North Atlantic Books, and We Will Tell Our Own Story, The Lions of Africa Speak. Bayo Akomolafe is the visionary founder of the Emergence Network and host of the online post-activist course, We Will Dance with Mountains. So I want to welcome Bayo this morning, and I'll let him take over. Before he does, I would just like to let everyone that has joined us today know that in the Q&A, if you look at the bottom and you find your Q&A on the screen, while Bayo is speaking, you can go ahead and start putting questions that you would have for Bayo in the Q&A, not in the chat function, but in the Q&A, and we will choose some of those at the end, as many as we can get to for Bayo to answer. So without further ado, Bayo, take it away.
Thank you, Frank, and good morning from Virginia, where I'm presently at. I greet you, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be here with you, to have some time in conversation. I hope you're well. I know greetings are usually just protocols these days, but I really hope that in these times of convergence and deep uncertainty and strife, that you are well, that your families are well, and that your communities are well, and that you're supported and surrounded in ways that escape language. That is my blessing and hope. As I dive into this conversation now, I don't have enough time in a conversation about time, so I'm just gonna get right into it. Okay, my name is Bayo, and I'm from Nigeria. It's the blackest nation on earth. My brother Timothy here can tell you more if you'd like to know what that is about. And where I come from, there are beautiful stories that we tell about the world that are often codified into archetypes, right? And myth and legend. One of the stories I'm very fascinated about is the story of the trickster in the Yoruba cosmology called Eshu. Eshu has been poorly translated as the devil by the invading colonial forces and translations, but I think that's a poor translation of what Eshu is, though I don't think Eshu would mind, because Eshu is a trickster, right? He would be like, yeah, I would explore the idea of being a devil, right? And one of the things that, can be known about Eshu is found in what is called Oriki. And Oriki is some kind of poetry. It's stories that have been told and orally translated and transmitted across generations. One Oriki about Eshu, who is the god of the crossroads and who is more pervasive than you might think. So let me just segue here quickly and say Eshu is in Eshu's agency is codified in the Washington Monument. You know that phallic tower in Washington, D.C.? That is actually the erect penis of Eshu. Scandalizing, I know, but there's rich histories around the transmission of symbols and how they're tied to this god of the crossroads. I don't know how many of you, I was going to ask how many of you thought I was in front of a live audience, not digital. But I asked this question yesterday, that how many of you are sci-fi aficionados here? If you, I know Frank is, Zan is as well. If you know the movie Alien, the movie Alien came out in the 70s and it's a series, right? The alien is actually designed around Eshu, right? The person who designed Alien took direct inspiration from Eshu, because Eshu is said to have his penis on his head. I'm sorry, I'm just speaking about phallic structures right off the bat, but that is the nature of the trickster. And so the alien is designed around that structure of the trickster, but I digress. The Orikis, the poetry told about Eshu, one of them goes like this, and I'm leading somewhere with this. One of them says that Eshu, and I'm paraphrasing here, not repeating it word for word, but Eshu lives in a palace, right? And finds it too constraining, too small. And then he relocates to a seed, and now he can stretch himself, right? So somehow Eshu is transgressing our steady notions of space and constraints and distance, right? Another one goes like this. Eshu gets so angry that when he punches a stone, it bleeds, right? Eshu gets angry and punches a stone and it bleeds. So the inanimate is also organic. The inanimate is also sentient. The inanimate is also probably like human, almost anthropomorphic, if you will. Eshu disturbs the boundaries between the human and the more than human, disturbs the boundaries between the monster and the convenient, right? But perhaps the most shocking to me, and I think the one that is probably useful for our purposes around time, in the conversation around time, is this line that I've read, that Eshu throws a stone today and kills a bird yesterday. Eshu throws a stone today and kills a bird yesterday. For those of you who like sci-fi, you know that's very gangster, right? He throws a stone today and kills a bird that has stopped flying yesterday, but is somehow still in the sky flying, right? So that is time travel raised to the nth degree. And it's probably my poetic inspiration to disorient us and our commitments to time as a linearity, as a steady, even, imperial march to the future, which also has colonial signification implications, right? So what I want to do is to introduce the trickster, the God of the crossroads, to our conversation around time, okay? And to do this, I will invite Bill Gates, PowerPoint slides, to join me as I try to marshal some points together, just to discipline, because I don't have enough time, so that I can streamline some thoughts. And it might be helpful as well if you want notes. So I've taken some notes. So what I'm about to do is going to be in part a reading and in part a storytelling and co-thinking session around our notions of the future and time. So I'm just going to dive into it straight away. Okay, so I call this "The Prophet Always Arrives with an Awkward Limp." It's a mouthful of a title, but I would explain in time, or probably fail to explain, who cares, what this is about and where this is going, right? What I want to do is this, in 3 sentences, is to suggest that the future is not natural, right? We might think of time and its department called the future as something given, universal, equal, and keen, and unassailable. It's natural. There's nothing you can do about time. Time is just there. Time is, right? I want to denaturalize time and to suggest that the future is an artifice. It is not inexorable, inevitable, or the imperial march of linearity towards an elusive future that we think it is. I'm also disturbing the idea that the future is an ideal and a pre-relational quality, right? By pre-relational, I mean it lives outside of the material realm of relationships. It lives outside of concatenations and entanglement. It just is living in some platonic heaven somewhere and somehow affecting everything else. I want to disturb that notion of the future as an ideal, right? And I'm actually saying, practically saying, that the future is a co-production, a manufacturing of orientation, a cartographical project, and possibly a form of entrapment. Okay? So if I'm not pilloried at the end of this conversation, then that's some success. Okay, let's get ahead with it. Did everyone see this news item? Came out recently. In fact, just yesterday, or 2 days or 3 days ago. So you might know the famous Dutch artist called Piet Mondrian. He died in 1944, and he created this beautiful abstract piece of art called New York City 1, right? He never really completed it, and so he never really got to sign it. But the year after he died in 1944, in 1945, it was taken to a German museum, right? And it has been there for the past 75 years, okay? No big deal. Pieces of art almost always end up in museums, unfortunately. But that's another conversation. A conversation has erupted recently about this piece of art, because it turns out that this piece of art might be upside down and might have been viewed for 75 years upside down. This is news. These are images from the cyberspace. A Piet Mondrian painting has been hanging upside down for decades, for 75 years, in the Smithsonian, in CNN, everywhere. It's everywhere, and everyone is scandalized by the idea that we've been viewing it the wrong way. And you might just say, well, it's just a simple matter of turning it the right side up. Not quite, you see, because they determined to turn this painting the right side up, to turn it the way it's supposed to be, is to risk damaging it. And I'm not going to get into the details of that, but there's something about leaving it as it is that feels more convenient to the purposes of presentation than turning it upside down. I just wanted to think about that. So I was eating this story, and I was thinking about all the portraits, all the images, and all the stories about the world that are upside down, right? All the ways we have been habituated into seeing things, right? And we've been told this is the right way to see it. And we're compelled to see it that way. But it's a very, very risky way of performing that portrait, if you will. So that, in a sense, we've been, whatever it is, whether it's time or the human body or agency or accountability, we're stuck in silos or rivulets or performative ways of seeing the world that excludes other alternatives, other ways of being with the world, right? And that is the story here. That is the story. You know, I even went further to think that maybe it's not even the case that the portrait has an intrinsic or its essential way of being presented, right? With or without a signature. Art is not intrinsically or essentially itself. It is relational. So there are ways to see it that might not be the right side up or upside down and have nothing to do with those, postures, right? Maybe it's not the case that a portrait has a correct way. Maybe it is more an invitation for us to see how we create and co-participate and co-produce the world, and how this shapes our moral habituations and our commitments. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that all our portraits are upside down, everything. And I don't mean that it's wrong. By upside down, I don't mean the way we see the world is wrong. That's just a impoverished binary, wrong versus right. I don't mean to say that the world is upside down and what we need to do is turn it right side up. I mean to say that everything is upside down. We are always wronging the world, right? There is no way to see the world that is an objective representation of it. We are always co-participating in it. We are always implicated in how the world emerges. To know the world is to interfere, right? The Enlightenment notion that we can stand outside of the world and view it with any representational categoricity or purity is to perpetuate colonial trouble, right? So there is no standing outside of the world to see it, or like Chinua Achebe said quite eloquently in his book, The Arrow of God, we stand with the world and we must move at its pace, right? Of course, I write here that I'm not digging the mustache by brother Beard, but that's beside the point. So let's go into the images of the future, right? The steady, resilient, sticky notions of the future that we hang on the walls of our existences, right? The future is a thing to come. These are the stories we tell. The future is a thing to come. It's a temporal point down the line. It's how we mark the movement of time in its inexorable movement towards the next, right? The other story is that we are agents within time, right? So we are separate from time. Time is a universal containing our activities, but we're kind of separate from it, right? It's universally accessible, but we are separate from time, right? We are agents that act within time. Time is just kind of like a steel dome that covers everything we do, right? Our best efforts as subjects of time, and I chose those words specifically to suggest something that I hope is obvious by the time I'm done. Our best efforts as subjects of time is to try to anticipate, to predict, to reduce uncertainty, to shape variables, and to enhance survivability, to extend the mastery of control, right? Time waits for no one. I grew up hearing that all the time, right? It's a Calvinian, Newtonian assumption, right? And it's a way of keeping us productive. Time waits for no one. So get working. It's very Calvinistic. It's very messianic. It's very productivist. It's very capitalist. Get working. Time waits for no one, right? These are some of the sticky assumptions, by no means encyclopedic, but an invitation for us to touch these very sticky, mostly invisible notions that hide behind the curriculum of temporality. Pardon me. But then there are very sticky stories as well, alternative stories about time. And I grew up hearing these stories as well. This is a painting by John Martin in 1816, and it's named after a biblical event in which Joshua, who was the lieutenant of Moses, was fighting a war with an adversary, and noticed that it was getting dark. This is in the book of Joshua. I'm not going to tell you where it is. If you do know where it is, then heaven is guaranteed for you. If you don't know what I'm talking about at all, then you're going to hell. That's all I have to say. Well, Joshua is fighting this war, and it starts to get dark, and he knows that if it falls dark, he will fail. The Israelites will fail. And so what he does is to pray to God to hold the sun in the sky. Of course, in those times, they believed that we lived in a geocentric universe, right? A universe that is built around the earth, right? And so the sun was supposedly going around the earth. And so you can understand the language of holding the sun in the sky, right? And so Joshua basically said, asked God to hold the sun in the sky. And it's known by many theologians as the greatest miracle in the Bible, because God supposedly answered the prayer and held the sun in the sky. What a privilege, right? To just hold time and space, or to stop time. But maybe that's not even such a big deal after all. Maybe we finally are able to play God, because in 1945, August 6th, in 1945 in Hiroshima, at 8:15 a.m., according to some readings, time stood still. You know the story, don't you? Is the Enola Gay dropped little boy, and this nuclear explosion basically froze time and melted the rift between heaven and earth in a mushroom cloud, right? It was repeated, this anfractuous explosion was repeated 3 days later in Nagasaki at 11:02 a.m. And before that, at 5:30 in the Trinity testing site, because of course the United States bombed itself before it bombed Japan, in July 16, 1945, right? So these are stories that suggest a queer, scandalous notion, just like the issue story I started out with, the idea that time can possibly be frozen, and time is not as steady as we think it is, right? And this is what I write here, the idea of time and the future as a manufactured, sociological and material, hence socio-material, local, uneven configuration is a compelling orientation and therefore disorientation today. And this is coming not just from indigenous accounts like the issue story, not just from history, not just from quantum field theory and, transdisciplinary explorations like feminist new materialisms and post-humanisms and post-structuralisms. There is the steady notion, an eruption of an idea, imagination, that time is not as patriarchal as we think it is, that time is soft and squishy. It's not even circular. It is squishy. It's slushy time, right? Like someone throwing a stone today and killing a bird yesterday. That kind of thing, right? So here's my thesis around here, bringing these ideas together, that the future isn't a given, right? It is an ecology of practices. The future is a secretion of a particular way we have arranged ourselves in society. It's a social experiment, right? It is a more than human, and I don't mean humans are doing it. This is what I mean by more than human. I mean that we are always living with, right? There's no becoming that is not a becoming with. We are assemblage citizens. We live with the others. We live with technology, with furniture, with textures, with colors, and all of these things in their organization co-produce certain realities to the exclusion of other realities, right? So the future is a more than human. I love the word fungal, so I just threw it in there. It's a fungal, theological, socio-material, rhizomatic, techno-spiritual arrangement. It is a political ideology. It's not just something that is natural and given, right? Temporalities are co-produced within assemblages, right? So I'm implicating cell phones and biological cells and phones and screens and televisions and technologies and affect and emotions and how the future becomes stabilized, maintained, and reproduced, which is just a very infractuous academese way of saying that the future is an effect, right? It's an effect of a particular arrangement. And I've said this before, time is not natural. Time is an artifice of specific relations. So that the question really isn't what is time, it is how is time, right? How is time? How is temporality? How is a body being manufactured in this moment, right? So we come to the question, and I hope I'm doing good with time. Maybe I have about 10 more minutes, right, in clock time. But if I get to the end of 10 minutes and there's no more time left, I might insist on African time because I really want to pull this off, okay? So here's the heart of this. The question then isn't, or the question rather is, for the purposes of our conversation, why is the future so sticky? You know, I was just having a conversation a while ago with about 600 people online about the ubiquity of trauma, right? And there's a lot of empirical support to, you know, empirical evidence to support the idea that trauma is the most, is the term or the word of this decade, right? Trigger, I'm triggered, trauma this, trauma that, trauma informed this and that, but that's not our conversation here, right? I feel if we actually dedicated some time to it, the future is just as sticky, right? We talk about the future all the time. And professional futurism and foresight is a really successful enterprise rising on the back of this dedication to the future, right? So I'm saying that it would be interesting to trace a genealogy, but whatever genealogy you trace, it might run us through or take us through the legacies of the World War in the 30s, in the first decade of the 20th century and the 40s, right? That World War I and World War II somehow gave us the future, right? In the ways that we speak about it. And I'm speaking about on the, you know, in the wake of those wars, the world kind of experienced a sea change, this rapid transformation, this industrialization, the mechanization and rationalization of the landscapes, right? A dissociation from ecological clocks, parking lots, donuts, you know, on demand, right? A streamlining of agency and accountability and countability, and the centralization of the individual subject, which is just a roundabout way of saying the future is a very militaristic concept that emerged from a commitment. This is not a way of saying the future is bad, okay? So just dispense with the idea that I'm dancing within binaries here. I'm trying to touch the conditions of how specific realities become produced to the exclusion of alternatives, right? That's not everything to say about the future. This is obviously speculation, but it's an invitation for us to notice how the future cannot be really embraced until we really look into how a militaristic era created and still creates and produces our infatuation and obsession with the future, right? So I'm trying to say here that the future, again, is not natural. The future is a political commitment to mastery, right? To control, to controlling the variables so that we can predict the next, because our bodies are still ringing with the explosions of Hiroshima and the trauma of that moment. What next to do except to know what next, or how to navigate the complexities of the next, right? And I want to quote, I might not fully do this, Dr. Devon Powers, who is at Temple University, who briefly speaks about this in an essay, saying that the study of the future became more systematic as social scientists developed futurological methods. And maybe I'll skip that. The slides are available. And, you know, a genealogy of the future that she traces goes through the Royal Dutch Shell, which has a heavy presence in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. So you cannot really speak about the future without speaking about the military and giant corporations who sponsored programs, right, and projects so that scientists could, with greater guarantees and certitude, talk about what was next, right? Of course, I will not go into how this was developed as a way of predicting consumer behavior, right? There's a lot here to explore, but there's not enough time to do it, but African time is always available. In other words, the future is a product. From the 1940s till now, what we've been doing, just like the museum has been doing to that painting, is reproducing the future or temporality as a product, possibly to be sold, definitely to be identified and marketed, definitely to be made intelligible to the highest bidder, right? Change is a product. And this is how we commodify and create and reproduce colonial tensions. And by colonial, I mean hegemonic realities. It's how we stabilize the surface and externalize or invisibilize or pathologize other ways of being in the world. So that in a roundabout way, seems like our obsession with the future is a form of incarceration in a particular moral order, a particular temporality. So again, the future is a place-making protocol tied up with the troubling resuscitation and reproduction of the Anthropocene, the age of man, of industrial man and his ability to control the next. Because how we anticipate the future, and by anticipate the future, I mean what we're doing now, and by we, I don't mean humans. So what we're doing and also what is done to us to create assemblages of anticipation. How we anticipate the future reproduces certain patterns of stability. It says that I'm above the environment. And that is somehow the story that is at the heart of climate chaos, isn't it? Right? And so this is how even our obsession with the future is a form of climate trouble. Oh, I've said this already. Okay. It's like we are rebuilding and reproducing sensorial monocultures of orientation. And I put there the beautiful critter, a monstrous critter, but it's beautiful nonetheless, called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis, which is a fungal entity that possesses ants and insects and basically converts them into zombie ants, directing how they move in the environment. And we might think of ourselves as beyond these kind of trans-species infections, but I don't think we are anyway. But that's another conversation. In what ways are we possessed by our obsession with the future? And what is it excluding us from noticing? What are we missing here when we view the portrait upside down? What is left untethered? What is left to roam free and wild? Those are the questions that I ask. And those are the questions that lots of people are asking. I'm part of a group with friends of mine, specialists. I'm not a futurist, but in a sense, we all are futurists. I do some transdisciplinary work with, specifically modeled by Dr. Real Miller, who until this year was the head of futures literacy at UNESCO, right? So a lot of work is being done to democratize the future, to say that there are other futures possible. There are other possibilities. There are other openings. We don't have to be inexorably oriented towards that particular street when there are other things on the menu. There are other ways of getting lost. My people would say, in order to find your way, you must get lost, generously lost, right? There are other possibilities down the line. And I really appreciate the work that is being done here. But you see, even these efforts, like I write here, are not immune to a reconvergence, or bringing back to the territory of the militaristic, right? Because some of my diffractive, and I don't want to name it as critique, because I don't like to do critique, I do diffraction. I'm reading insights into each other, looking for patterns that are emerging so that novelty can thrive, right? But for our purposes, I'll just call it critique. Some of my critique of futures literacy is that in trying to play with other possibilities, it might re-anthropocize, it might reconvene the notion of the human as an individual separate from ecology, right? Like, oh, let's play with these possibilities. Storytelling is not human. Storytelling is ecological, right? We imagine with environment. We're not separate from the environment when we imagine the world, right? We are secretions, tentacular extensions of the environment, so that we are always embedded, embroidered, and embodied within ecology. But there's a sense in which some iterations of futures literacy tries to reenact anthropocentric, exclusivity in trying to invite us to play with new possibilities. And the risk is that we always, in trying to think of ourselves as masters of time, we converge or come back to the troubling center we're trying to escape from, right? So this is why I speak about prophecy, and I'm about to end, okay? This is the reason why I speak about prophecy. And this is the reason why I speak about prophecy as chronofeminism, right? Have I missed a slide about chronofeminism? Let me just go back a bit. Oh yeah, I didn't miss it at all. Okay. All right. So this is why I speak about prophecy. Prophecy is, there are images of the prophet that are quite sticky in my mind, especially someone as I am growing up in the Christian South of Nigeria, right? The prophet was this scraggly old man with a Gandalfian beard and sandals who was poised at the end of time or at history, and who always had this doom message, right? That God is saying this, and this is the future you will have if you don't go by this way or that way. And I want to not dehumanize, but de-anthropocize prophecy, right? To decenter the human, because I'm a post-humanist and an animist in my thinking, right? So I think of the future as a spatial, moral, temple material configuration, like I've already tried to articulate. It always exists in tension with other anticipatory configurations. And if this is so, then time can be stretched, time can be stopped, time has cracks, time has marronage, time has localities. Time is not just this one stream. It's not the main stream, it's the many streams, right? There are many ways of inviting temporality, and our bodies are temporal machines. We're constantly secreting time. I wish I could go into a conversation about how our organs actually have their different clocks. So the idea that you have a body clock is already a colonial elision and invisibilization of the multiplicity of temporalities that are invited in how our bodies come to be. right? I think of prophecy as a post-humanist disruption of the integrity of time, an explosion in the moral order, right? An exposure to its potencies and hidden tensions. And I love this term, embryonic lines. When I was preparing my slides, it came to me and I have to write an essay about embryonic lines, right? It's like there are always tensions in the surface of things. And prophecy is the making open or the making clear of these tensions. So I don't mean prediction when I speak about prophecy. I don't mean just speaking about the future. That's another colonial form of entrapment. I don't mean the human. I mean what breaks through temporality. What breaks through our ideas of time is prophecy, right? As I write here, the prophet is not the scraggly, limping, bearded human poised at the end of history. The prophecy is the limp that subverts history, making forward movement difficult. And we have several examples of that, like the pandemic that we're still in, right? Prophecy is the decolonization of time. It's a transversal event. And it's not, because it's transversal, because it's marked by transversality, it's not always available for scrutiny or analysis. And I know that is scandalizing to the modern mind, because to the modern mind, everything should be accessible and reducible to language. But prophecy is the parabolic event that skirts the surface of things and in so doing changes it forever, right? A pandemic, the blast at 1102 in Nagasaki, an event, it doesn't have to be spectacular. The birth of an autistic child, my son is on the autistic spectrum, though we don't use that language in my family. Just something as an interface that is like a crack or rupture in the fabric of things that invites us to look again, to slow down, to reconvene what the future might mean, what the past is doing, still doing, and what the present might look like, right? It's no longer past, present, future. It's past, future, present, elsewheres, right? I just gave it elsewheres to just mark the space that language cannot embrace fully, right? Prophecy is an interface that generates, that produces. It's not just a deficit in time. In the ways I've been joking about African time, it's usually pathologized as a lack of punctuality. To me, that's a crack. That's an invitation to stay with the possibilities of a loss of punctuality, right? And I can tell you stories about how that is performed, but again, there is no time, right? It's negative theology. It's an apophatic unsaying of the said. And I'm using theological concepts here with apophasis, which is a refusal to say, becoming an intrinsic feature of that which we want to language. Like God, for instance, there's the cataphatic traditions that insists on saying more and more things about God. But there's the apophatic that says the more we say about God, the more we lose a sense of godliness, right? So it's in not saying anything that we get to really know God, right? And I think that in a sense, the prophetic is this unraveling of the habitual patterns of how we perform the future and how we perform time. It's a wound. It's an ethical mispronunciation of our forward movement. So it is prophecy. Here's my point. My whole point has been to say that we need these democratic projects of democratizing futurity. Yes, they also run the risks of repeating the same colonial tensions that we're living with and therefore oppression. Yes. To really put this democratic, playful experimentations and attempts to create new temporalities to work, we cannot center human activity. And this is why I think to really put them to work, we need a framework of prophecy. It is prophecy that is the condition of our projects of creating new timelines or new temporalities, right? It's prophecy. Prophecy is the space of humility. Prophecy is the space that invites us to listen. Prophecy is what says, nah, you don't have it all together, right? This is where you fall down, and you need to fall down here, right? So let me end with this. Everyone is speaking about going forward, and I'm trying to say that forward is not enough, right? Forward risks reinscribing the legacies of war, the images we're used to. The invitation of our time is to inhabit prophecy as a stain with the cracks. It's the chrono-feminist movement. I don't know where it's domiciled, but I think it's somewhere. Experimenting with lateness. What else might mean? This is a question for us. What else might we mean by cracks in time? And what opportunities for appropriation are possible when we think of time as stretchy and when we think of cracks as generous and hospitable? So this reconvenes foresight as decolonial inquiry, not just the professional task of guaranteeing the future, but of creating spaces, tracing autistic wonder lines, errancy, lines of errancy away from the convergence of the future. How do we co-create new temporalities together? What do we need to be exceeded by? What monsters do we need to sit at the feet of to co-create new times together? The radical, exquisite otherwise that we miss when we stabilize ourselves in the familiar. I end with saying we owe something else to the future besides the future. And I wonder what comes with turning the portrait a different way. Maybe that's a form of art in itself. Maybe risking the loss of the portrait is an art form in itself. Maybe saying, yeah, we might lose it, but let's try this way. What kind of art might that be? Okay, thank you.
Bayo, that was amazing. And I want us to stay on African time because I am not satiated yet. I can listen to this for another hour or so. And here I am stuck in time still. It's been such an honor to listen to you, and I want to give some space for the GFAC to ask questions because that's how we usually model these kinds of things, to let them ask questions. I know there may be some from the audience that's listening as well. It looks like there's over 70 other people that are in here listening as well. And so I could say a ton, but I'm not going to. That's not my role. So GFAC, I would love for one of you to ask a question. You can unmute your mics. Please ask Bayo what is on your heart. And while you're doing that, I'm looking also at the Q&A. Audience, if you want to put anything in Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A function, I'll try to get to those questions as well.
Bayo, thank you very much for that. That was really an amazing talk, and heard you talk before, and that is really wonderful. I love what you said about decentering from humans, because for me, the question that I would always ask anybody for any topic or issue at all is, how do we see ourselves in the environment or in the world that we are in? And I think we have been so anthropocentric in our thinking, that we need to decolonize our thinking and see ourselves as not the center of the universe anymore, to see ourselves as in relation with animals, with plants, with the environment basically, and the cosmic universe, as Frank always mentioned. I really don't have a question. I just wanted to affirm that I totally musings with us today, and that I do believe that there are a lot of opportunities for exploring the other temporalities, and I think that's something that we should risk doing, because it is risky to go into something different and start thinking differently. But that is something that we should start doing. Thank you, Bayo.
Thank you. I'll just quickly say to that I think dissociation is a temporality itself, right? Dissociation, our modern separation from these other clocks is a form of time itself, right? It's a way we navigate and are navigated by the world around us. And it produces certain things to the exclusion of others. My question is, what are the things that we're missing out on?
It's amazing. And Sheila has the ear of Sherman Cruz, who is the chair of the Association of Professional Futurists. Well, so we'll see. Sheila, it's your job now to go back and tell Sherman. So
you're wrong. All of you are wrong.
No, I'm just kidding. I do see some other amazing questions here. I also see Zan's hand is up. Let me get to an audience question and then see if you can answer that and have enough time for Zan also to ask a question, because that would be amazing. And there's just so many good questions. I know I can't get to them all. I have to ask you this one, by someone in the audience asked, why do we separate dreams from other kinds of sensation and experience? Is it fundamentally different from sight or hearing in the everyday? What would your comment be on that?
I wasn't expecting that. There are many things that I'm doing around dreaming today and social dreaming, which is a thing in itself. But yes, that's a very important question. Multiple cultures have traditions that centralize dreaming, right? Where there is a ritualizing of dreaming as a form of seeing, as a divinatory process, as a communal, irreducibly communal process. But you see, brother, dreaming is not conducive to modern productivity, right? It's not conducive to getting the work done because it interferes with too much. You could ask the same question about grieving, right? We don't really have spaces for grieving, right? I'm a psychologist, a recovering psychologist, and I know that my work is not to help people grieve. That's what I was trained to do. I was trained to shrink people's feelings of grief and get them back into the rat race. That's psychology is the policeman of capitalism, as a dear friend of mine would say. So I think dreaming gets in the way too much. Maybe that's why dissociation feels like a temporality. Maybe there are other forms of being in the world that would celebrate dreaming as an intelligence of some sort. Yeah.
Awesome. I'm going to let Zan ask her a question, and I'm hoping that we can get to at least one more after that too, Zan. Okay. So let's see if we can shove in two more. Zan, go ahead.
So I just want to say thank you so much. That was amazing. And there's no way to do justice to ask all the questions there are to ask. I've got pages and pages of notes. I will listen and re-listen to the recordings, read and reread your presentation. There's so many points of departure that I would want to go more deeply into. So many things that resonated as I am on my journey as a futurist and trying to decolonize my thinking, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to say thank you so much, because I think that this was so fruitful. So it opens up so many spheres for future conversations. So I don't really have a cogent question to ask, but just to say I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful too. Thank you so much, sister. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, great. That's Zan. You didn't even ask a question, so I can go ahead and get to Zan is just one of our favorite people, so we love her so much. I want to sort of shove two questions together here, Bayo, because somebody simply asked, although it's not a simple question by any stretch of the imagination, if you could give any advice for a futurist, what would it be? But the other question that was very similar was, how might futurists provoke thinking around chronofeminism, the stretchiness of time, to be mindful of how our society sees change and the future as a product? I know they're slightly different questions, but what advice would you give to people who are pursuing this futurist as a profession, so to speak? Because I know that you spoke about, and we believe this too, that everyone really is a futurist in its own right, right?
What was the first question you asked again? I didn't hear that.
That one was seems much more simple. I think it's just as deep. If you could give advice to, or any advice for a futurist, what would it be?
Oh, right. Well, I would invite you to pay attention to the spaces where things don't add up. Right. It's like we are going through the motions. I'm here in Virginia speaking at a conference convened by Pharrell Williams around Black excellence. And in my keynote yesterday, just before I got up, I started to sweat because I was like, I don't get nervous speaking, but I was nervous at that point because I knew what I had to say would get me pilloried or pulled out into the village square and decapitated, something like that. Because I got up eventually and I said, Black excellence is a form of white capture. Right. I said, Black excellence is still a surveillance tactic of colonization. Right. Of course, I developed a point beyond binaries and that thinking, but it was shocking to see how many people came afterwards and said, you know what, I've been trying to say that. I really am grateful that you say that. It just gave me the impression, and I get this all the time, that many of us go through the motions just to perpetuate a stability, right? We just go through the motions. We are very, very tactical, and we've become very, very strategic at pushing down the contradictions, the ironies, the spaces where things don't add up. Maybe futurists can form Futurists Anonymous and come in circles and discuss like, hi, Frank. Hello, Frank. I'm disappointed with the future. Tell us more, Frank, right? Maybe they're collective we can form where we can rethink our devotions or just turn things around. And maybe in doing that, we find collective strength in approaching new paradigms of thinking.
So powerful. Well, on that note, Bayo, we just want to all the GFAC and those of us here at the Future School want to immensely thank you for what you shared with us today. I believe that we will watch and read and listen to this over and over and over again. We just came off of our transformations retreat, and some of these people were there as well. And a lot of these same topics were the topics that were coming up during that time. So we can hope to continue to rattle the nest, so to speak, and to live in the space. And such an honor to hear from you today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough. And we are so grateful.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. Now, Nicole, I'm going to turn it over to you just for a quick wrap up. And thank you for everyone for coming as well.
Yes, and I just have to verbalize, I could not continue without saying my thanks and my gratitude for this conversation and awakenings that have happened in myself. And I, like Zan, will be rewatching and relearning in addition to this life experience. But at the risk of moving through the motions, we do want to just give a couple of announcements before we go. We will continue this series in 2023, so please look out for additional speakers that we will have join us in the new year. We do have the Year of Free continuing through December, so if there is somebody that you would like to nominate for the gift of Foresight, we'll put that in the chat for you to go through that process and give somebody that opportunity. If this really resonated with you in these types of discussions and you're interested in deepening your knowledge and learning kind of the methodology behind this type of thinking, we do have some upcoming learning events, a 6-month opportunity activation starting in February, and then our 3-day foundations program. We have a European, Middle East, Africa session in March and a more North and South America session in April, so check out those. And if you are interested in certification, if that adds any value to you, we do have an upcoming testing window. Our GFAC members are who back that accreditation. That's coming up December 1st through February 15th, and the deadline to apply is December 15th. So please check out those additional opportunities. We also will have a survey that will launch when this session closes. So please give your feedback. That helps us select speakers next year. It helps us share your stories of what you learned with Bayo after the fact, and we always learn from your contributions. So thank you, GFAC. Thank you, Bayo, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for our global participants joining us across the world. and we'll see you in 2023. Bye-bye.